If you want to know something about yourself, sit on your bed one night and say to yourself, you got to mean this. Like, you got to be desperate. This is no game, this. It's like, my life is not everything I want it to be. And perhaps it's not everything that I need it to be. And by need, I mean, my life is so unbearable that the suffering that's attendant upon that is make me nihilistic, cynical, bitter, unable to have a good relationship, driving the proclivity to see evil everywhere except within my own heart. Like, these are problems, man. And you ask yourself, you sit on the bed and say, okay, man, I'm ready to learn something. Like, what's one thing I'm doing wrong that I know I'm doing wrong, that I could fix, that I would fix? It's like, you meditate on that, you'll get an answer. And it won't be one you want, but it'll be the necessary one.
What would I say to these young people who always say to me, Steve, I want to do this, but you can see them stifled by fear because it's like...
Yeah, well, it's like, make a plan, man. That's not good. It's not just. It's not fair. It's not meritorious. All of those things. Man, maybe you shouldn't be there. But what you can do to begin with is every bloody thing you possibly can do to put yourself in the most virtuous and powerful negotiating position possible. And you have to think like a snake in some sense. To do that, you got to get the details right. You have to be prepared to bite, and you have to have your eyes on the prize, so to speak. We're built to walk uphill. And when you reach the pinnacle of the hill, you want to stop and appreciate the vision, but the next thing you want is a higher hill in the distance, because it's from the uphill climb that we derive our value. And I mean this technically. And so in some sense, and this is part of the religious enterprise, you want a goal that you can never attain, right? So you can always move closer to the goal that recedes as you move towards it. You think, well, that's frustrating. It's like Sisyphus pushing the rock uphill. But it's not, because as you pursue that goal, you put yourself together and your life does get better and richer and more abundant. You want them to be above everything you're doing so you can continually move towards something that's more sublime and better. That's what you are. You're here to live, not to sleep. And maybe if you're lucky, while you're pursuing that and while you're immersed in it, you get to be happy, and you should fall on your knees and be grateful for that when it happens. You know, it's a gift. It really is a gift. And it comes upon you unexpectedly, your happiness, you know. But you aim to climb uphill to the highest peak you can possibly envision. And that's better than happiness. And we all have our privileges and our curses, you know. All of us have that. That's why it's not useful to be envious of people. You're a young man, you see someone drive by in a Ferrari with a blonde, and you think, my God, he's got everything. And, you know, the woman in the car is a prostitute who's got a cocaine addiction, and her life is just one catastrophe after another. And he's had to lie and cheat his way into this position, and he's afraid that everything's going to come crashing down on him, and that's what you're jealous of. And it's just not that profound. You don't want someone else's fate. Man, your fate's enough, and your adventure's enough. It's plenty. It's more than you can ever fully realize. And so that's also part of the reason that we all believe that the individual has some intrinsic dignity. It's, don't be so sure that your position and your room is so damn trivial. It might be your attitude towards it that's trivial. And if you're in dire straits and dire circumstances, just look at how much opportunity you have to make things better.
How are you doing?
Brilliantly and terribly. That's...
Why did you include terribly?
Well, for example, now when I go, wherever I go in the world, people come up to me and they're usually, I wouldn't say they're happy to see me. They're often in tears, and they often have a pretty rough story to relate. You know, they were suicidal or nihilistic or homicidal or trapped, desperate, you know, and they tell me that real fast. And then they say, I've overcome that to a large degree, and thank you for that. And you think, well, that's really something to have that happen over and over. In some ways, you might think, well, how could anything better possibly happen to you than to have people come up to you all over the world, strangers, and open themselves up like that, like they're old friends so quickly. But at the same time, it's an awful thing, because you see, even in the revelation of their triumph, the initial depth of their despair. So I wouldn't change that. But it's not nothing. And it's certainly not just happiness. It's better than happiness, but it's almost unbearable.
Why do you do what you do?
To see what will happen. Some programs you cannot predict, right? You cannot predict how they're going to end. You have to run them. You know, I believe that truth will save the world. I believe that. That's why you shouldn't lie. It's like you're warping the mechanism that orients you in the world. Do you really want to do that? This is a brutal world, man. And I've seen this in my clinical practice. People whose houses are built on foundations of sand, and the wind starts to blow and the floods start to rise, and they are in such trouble. Such trouble. If you're lucky and something terrible comes your way and you're reasonably honest and your relationships are in good order, maybe you won't end up in hell. And I mean hell. I don't mean death. There's lots of situations you can get yourself in where death would be far preferable to what you're going through. You need to be afraid of that. Don't lie. In my clinical practice, in 20 years, working with every sort of person you could imagine, I never ever saw anyone get away with anything even once. So you speak truthfully and you watch what happens and you take your consequences, you know, and maybe you hope and have some faith that in the final analysis, things will work out in your favor, but perhaps they will and perhaps they won't. But that's faith, eh? That's faith. Faith isn't believing in things you regard as ridiculous, sacrificing your intellect. It's a decision, you know. Will truth, beauty, and love save the world? Well, you can find out.